On the 6th of September 1976, a Soviet lieutenant named Viktor Belenko pointed a MiG-25, the most feared aircraft in the world, at Japan, and ran. He was flying the West's greatest unsolved problem, and he was about to hand it over. He came down at a civilian airport with about 30 seconds of fuel left, ran off the end of the runway, and climbed out onto the tarmac with a pistol to hold back the crowd. Within days, Japanese, American, and British engineers had that aircraft in pieces. And inside the most feared fighter in the world, they found hand-welded steel, rivet heads left standing proud of the skin, and a radar running on vacuum tubes, technology the West had thrown away a decade earlier. 9 years of fear and billions of dollars had been spent preparing to fight an aircraft that did not exist. Belenko was 29, a senior lieutenant in the Soviet Air Defense Forces. That morning, he had taken off from a base in the far east of Russia on what was logged as a routine training flight. He had spent years being told his country was the best of all possible worlds, and years watching it from the inside. The shortages, the drinking, the reports that got more optimistic the further up the chain they traveled. He had decided the only argument he had left was to leave. He flew the departure exactly as briefed. Somewhere out over the water, he rolled away from the exercise, dropped the nose, and took the MiG-25 down to about 30 meters above the sea, under the radar horizon, low enough that spray would have been visible from the cockpit. From that moment, the flight plan was fiction, and there was no version of the next hour in which he went home. He had no charts for Japan. He was navigating on a compass heading, a wristwatch, and a rough idea of where the coast ought to be, in an aircraft that drank fuel fast enough to measure its endurance in minutes rather than hours. When he climbed to find a landmark, he came up on Japanese radar, and every calculation changed at once. He was now visible, low on fuel, over a country whose air defenses had no idea what he was. If the weather had closed, or the fuel had run a minute shorter, or his own side had reached him first, he would have been shot down. In the Soviet Air Force, defection was treason, and treason carried the death penalty. He was later sentenced to death in absentia. If this is worth your time, a like helps. Subscribe and you'll catch the next one. 9 years earlier, at an air show outside Moscow, Western observers watched something enormous go past. A squared-off aircraft with wings like barn doors and 2 engines the size of a small truck. NATO called it Foxbat. What almost nobody in the West understood was what it had been built for. The Soviets had designed it to catch a specific American aircraft, the XB-70 Valkyrie, a bomber meant to cross Soviet airspace at 3 times the speed of sound. To stop it, they needed something that could climb like a rocket and run flat out in a straight line. Then the Americans canceled the Valkyrie. The interceptor survived, its target never entered service. And the other American aircraft it had been built to catch, the SR-71 Blackbird, turned out to be beyond it as well. Instead, the Foxbats went to work over the Middle East, running reconnaissance above Israeli airspace at nearly 3 times the speed of sound. Israeli Phantoms climbed after them and could not reach them. One dash was clocked at Mach 3.2. From the outside, the conclusion looked obvious. Wings that size meant it could turn as hard as it flew, and nothing in the West could live with it. So America built an answer to it. The requirement that became the F-15 Eagle was written around beating the Foxbat. More thrust than the aircraft weighed, so it could accelerate while climbing vertically. A wing big enough to turn with something that appeared able to turn brutally. And a radar that could find a target below it against the clutter of the ground, then kill it from beyond visual range. It became the most expensive fighter program of its era, an aircraft shaped, in its essentials, around a machine nobody in the West had ever touched. Over Japan, he disappeared into cloud. Air defense scrambled fighters and lost him completely. Belenko came out low over the city of Hakodate and circled the airport 3 times with the fuel warnings lit, while controllers pushed airliners out of his way. Within the hour, the most closely guarded aircraft in the Soviet inventory was sitting on a Japanese commercial airfield under a tarpaulin, ringed by police, its nose gear buried in the dirt past the end of the runway. Belenko asked for asylum in the United States. Moscow demanded the aircraft back immediately. And Japanese officials, having just acquired the intelligence prize of the Cold War, discovered a great many procedural matters requiring careful attention. Those 67 days were not comfortable ones. Japanese planners had to take seriously the possibility that Moscow would try to recover or destroy the aircraft before anyone could finish looking at it. The MiG-25 was moved inland under guard, and the examination ran under the assumption that it might be interrupted. It was dismantled, trucked to Hyakuri Air Base, and taken apart by a joint Japanese, American, and British team. The West had assumed a Mach 3 aircraft had to be titanium. At that speed, the air alone would soften anything less. Most of the MiG-25 was steel. Heavy, ordinary nickel steel, welded by hand, in places with the weld line visibly wandering. The radar in the nose was the most powerful ever fitted to a fighter. It was also full of vacuum tubes. The rest of the aircraft told the same story. A third of its weight was fuel. The cockpit was crude by Western standards, the instruments plain, the finish rough. Even the engines had begun life as a design for something meant to be used once and thrown away, machinery built for brute output rather than long service. And the wings that had implied such savage agility were not for turning at all. They were there to lift a very heavy aircraft in a straight line. The MiG-25 could barely maneuver. It had never been built to dogfight. It could not even hold the speed that made it famous. That Mach 3.2 dash over the Sinai had destroyed the engines that flew it. Past about Mach 2.8, the MiG-25 ate itself. Everything the West had read as sophistication was, up close, something simpler. An aircraft built fast, cheap, and heavy to do one thing. And the aircraft was only half of what arrived that morning. Belenko had brought his flight manual out with him, and himself, a serving interceptor pilot who could explain how the machine was actually flown, what its crews were told, and how tightly they were controlled from the ground. Western analysts had spent years reading Soviet capability off photographs. Now they had someone who had lived inside it. What he described was an air force built on rigid control. Pilots vectored onto targets by ground controllers, discouraged from improvising, trained to execute an intercept rather than to fight. The hardware and the doctrine turned out to be the same design, expressed twice. It was not a superfighter. It was a very fast, very simple interceptor built from cheap materials for exactly one job: climb, run at a target in a straight line, and kill it. And the crudeness was deliberate. Vacuum tubes are primitive, but they can be driven to enormous power, and they shrug off the electromagnetic pulse of a nuclear detonation. The steel was a choice too. The Soviets had built precisely what they needed, and not 1 gram more. Which leaves a harder question than the one the engineers were asked. Did Western intelligence genuinely misread the Foxbat for 9 years? Or was a terrifying Soviet superfighter exactly the aircraft you would want to describe to a committee deciding whether to fund the most expensive fighter program in history? In fairness, the analysts had almost nothing: a silhouette, a radar track, and a war they could not afford to lose. And the F-15 they built out of that fear outclassed the aircraft it was meant to beat, and has never been shot down by an enemy aircraft. The lesson was not that the Soviets were backward. It was that the West had been reading the wrong signal entirely, measuring an enemy by what its hardware looked like, instead of by what it had been asked to do. The reassessment that followed was quiet and enormous. Threat estimates that had been built on the Foxbat's assumed performance were rewritten. An aircraft that had justified a decade of spending was reclassified almost overnight as a fast, narrow, single-purpose machine. And a good deal of what the West thought it knew about Soviet engineering had to be revisited alongside it. The aircraft went home that November in 30 crates. The Soviets went through them, announced that parts were missing, and sent Japan a bill for $20 million. They also changed their identification codes across the entire Air Force and pushed through an upgrade program to replace the radar Belenko had handed over. The replacement set, the Safir-25, was in production within about 2.5 years. An entire fleet refitted because one lieutenant did not come back. And the story does not end with the myth collapsing. 15 years later, on the first night of the Gulf War, an Iraqi MiG-25 fired on Lieutenant Commander Scott Spiker's FA-18 and shot it down. By most accounts, the only American fixed-wing aircraft lost in air-to-air combat in the entire war. His remains were not recovered until 2009. The aircraft the West had laughed at after 1976 had killed a modern American fighter. Its descendant is still flying. The MiG-31 remains the fastest combat aircraft in the world, carries Russia's hypersonic missiles, and is expected to serve into the 2030s, and Russia can no longer build new ones. And the guessing game never really ended. Defense commentators are now invoking 1976 against China's J-20, a stealth fighter the West has watched for years at long range and never once taken apart. Nobody knows whether today's estimates are any better than the ones that built the F-15. Belenko was granted asylum, and in October 1980, President Jimmy Carter signed the private law that made him an American citizen. He spent the rest of his working life as a consultant to the people who had once been guessing what his aircraft could do. He died in Illinois in 2023, an American, almost 50 years after reaching the country with 30 seconds of fuel. The pilot who ended a myth by landing on it.